record button. And I love, okay. So everyone, sorry, we were starting here with Pat Hedley. She's an investor, advisor, and book author. This is Linda Love Talks podcast. Welcome back to my channel. I'm excited to have this book author here with me. I met her a couple years ago. I believe when she first launched her book is when I met her, and we've kept in touch. And every conversation that I have with her just gets better and better.
That's very kind of you. I'm so happy to be on this podcast with you, and I can't wait for our conversation.
Absolutely. So let me properly introduce you. I'd like to add the additional title of networking guru. Okay. Her book titled 100 How to Meet 100 People is a must-read book, and you should be reading this right now, especially if you are about to enter or graduate from college, especially if you are a first-generation college student or an introvert. Networking can happen on planes, at barbecues, at baseball games. Everywhere, everyone has the seeds of a great network within reach. We must proactively meet people in person to establish genuine relationships and build a network with lifelong value. Pat Hedley offers hard-earned wisdom about the true spirit of networking, a learned skill that anyone, even introverts, can master. She debunks the notion that networking is a interested act. Instead, she reveals it as a lifelong endeavor based on cooperation and reciprocity. Meet 100 People provides a networking toolkit for career success by offering inspiration, motivation, and practical advice. Real stories from those beginning the networking process, and sample resumes and outreach emails, the do's and the don'ts, reflection exercises to jumpstart your career by meeting 100 people, and more. The network will sustain your lifetime, and it begins with the first person that you shake hands with. All right, Pat, how did I do? Was that good?
That was very good. Thank you so much.
I appreciate it. So getting back to your book launched, I believe, 2017.
It did.
Yes. And then I met you, I believe, within the year or two that you launched it. And I was just an alumni attending a Berkeley College alumni event. And therefore, I met you. And since then, I myself have become a podcaster, producer, and book author as well. And I couldn't have done it without picking up or reading your book.
I am so excited that it had a good impact on you. Honestly, it is more gratifying for me to hear stories such as yours than anything else. It truly gives me pleasure when my book helps change lives for the better.
Absolutely. It got me out of my shell. So I want to expand that knowledge and your book to the audience, to the viewers, and to the listeners now. What is networking for listeners who probably have never heard of it?
Networking is very simple. It is proactively building relationships for mutual benefit, but it should be approached with a sense of curiosity and generosity. So it is really just reaching out to people to learn and to grow, and if you can, to be helpful to others. And you will find in short order that other people can be very helpful to you in that process.
What is the hardest thing about networking?
I think there are a couple of things that are hard. If you were to ask me the hardest thing, I think it is making the commitment to do it. So a lot of people are not aware of it, and that's difficult. First of all, you have to have awareness. But once you realize that it's an important thing to do, you have to commit to it. And it's just like becoming aware that exercise is good for you, right? You can have an awareness of that, but to make a commitment to say, I'm going to get on a program, or I'm not just going to go out for a long run on the weekend. I'm going to do something small as just 20 minutes, 3 times a week, but I'm going to do it consistently. That's the hard part. The hard part is to make a commitment and then to follow through. And it doesn't have to be meeting 100 people in one day, clearly. It should be meet a new person once a week or go out to lunch with somebody, once a week. Whatever the right pace, the commitment and the consistency is really important.
Absolutely. I love what you've done with this book. You've broken it down, networking, into three different parts: reflect, connect, and cultivate. And it's so interesting. If we can almost get back into the green room a little bit, you said something so interesting. You said something about after COVID, how this networking is even more essential.
Honestly, I wrote the book before COVID.
Mhm.
I very much, believe in the message and the importance of building relationships. But I think this message is even more important post COVID for a couple of reasons. One is that many of us have the opportunity to work remotely or in a hybrid way. So we are not with people in person as much. And what people who've never been out in the workforce going 5 days a week don't fully appreciate is all the learning that happens in unusual ways when you are with a group of people. It's the learning that happens before a meeting if you show up a little bit early. It's the learning that happens post a meeting when you have debriefs, which are a little bit harder to do when you're doing it virtually. It's the learning that happens in the lunchroom, the people that you bump into in the elevator bank. There's so much that occurs when you're with other people in real life that is hard to replicate when you're sitting from your home office. And interestingly, I think our example was a perfect one. You and I started a conversation before the official podcast, and it was during that pre-meeting time that we had a really great interaction.
Mhm.
And most people don't sign in early for their virtual meetings, nor do they stay a little bit later, perhaps with their colleagues post a virtual meeting. So they're missing some of that very important learning and that very important apprenticeship that almost every profession requires. Every professional job for sure, but I would argue every profession
Mhm.
has an element of it that is an apprenticeship. And you have to be with people and talk to people. I'm a huge proponent of technology. I love the fact that we now have Zoom and other ways to connect with people virtually. So I think that's great, but it's not sufficient. It's not enough to build those relationships. It's so important to try to have an in person meeting first or to follow up with an in person meeting when you have the chance. So if you're hybrid and you have 2 days a week that you go into the office, by golly, make the most of it. Go to lunch with someone, have coffee with someone, be with your colleagues, stay a little bit later and spend that time because the time that you spend is done in building relationships. And in building relationships, so much knowledge gets transferred and goodwill gets created that will be useful in some way that you can't predict down the line.
What inspired you to write this book?
There are three specific things that inspired me to write this book. I put in this book advice I wish I had had when I was first starting out. I wasn't as fully aware of how important relationships would be to me over time. The second reason was I have three adult children. I saw them go through the job process and I saw what they experienced. And I saw how this advice really made a huge difference to them. And the third reason is later in my career, when I saw how important this was, I thought to myself, I'm living this. I'm still living this. So this doesn't end when you get your first job. Not at all. It continues as long as you have the spirit and motivation to build relationships and to continue those relationships with people. And very interestingly, I'm a big reader. I love to read. And I think there's huge value to reading biographies or autobiographies of famous people. And I will guarantee that if you read those biographies or autobiographies, you will find that people will talk about their success being linked to the relationships that they've built over time. And so sometimes you have to get farther down in your career to be able to look back and realize it. And I'm at the point where I am farther along in my career. And this is my way of paying it forward to provide what I wish I had had and what I'm still doing today.
Definitely. And I think a lot of authors have that in them as well. They want to pay it forward or they want to help in some way. What do you think stops people from networking? Do you think it's just shyness or
I think the first thing is sometimes there's a lack of awareness. So if you don't know how good something is, how can you go and pursue it? I think if you are aware and people have told you it's so important to build relationships, the single most important thing that stops people is, in my view, fear. And certainly in my experience in talking to people. And people are afraid of three things, again, in my view. They're afraid that if they reach out, they're not going to hear anything back. And that scares them for some reason. And to that, I say, if you don't hear back, it's not really about you necessarily. You don't know what's going on in the other person's life. They may have had surgery. They may have had, they may be traveling, all sorts of things. So reach out again. There's no harm in trying more than once. The second thing people are really afraid of is the word no. And to that, I say, do not fear the word no. No is a temporary word. It may not necessarily be permanent. Get used to it. Successful people hear no all the time. Anybody who's a celebrity or an actor or a musician has heard no throughout the entire part of their life until they became successful. So successful people have heard no a million times.
Mhm.
Get used to the word no.
Yep.
And the third reason people are terrified to reach out is, what if somebody says yes? Oh my gosh, that's even scarier than a no, because then you have to show up. Then you have to take the virtual call or take the coffee or the meeting. And for some people, until you've gotten experience doing it, it may be a little bit intimidating. It's a little bit difficult. And a lot of people, especially those early in their professional lives, think that the purpose of a meeting, especially if they're looking for a job or even an informational interview, is to impress the other person. And I argue it's not that at all. The purpose of a meeting is to be able to ask good questions and to listen and to learn. And I think if you're motivated by learning, and if you're curious, and I would put myself into that category, I'm a very curious person, then meeting somebody and having a conversation takes on a totally different kind of experience than trying to go in there and impress somebody. That's hard and intimidating for almost anyone. But go in there with an open mind, a spirit of generosity, a spirit of curiosity, and the whole thing is very different. And it's not so intimidating. So those three fears, the no response, the no the no response, the no response, and the potential for actually having an interaction, they scare people because they haven't quite thought about it in the right way.
Absolutely. And you know what? The no response, it's okay. You reached out to maybe five and you got two responses. It's still great. Don't take it personal. Keep moving forward.
Keep moving forward. And I've heard such great stories in my travels post writing this book about people who've said, they had one, it was actually at an event in New York, a college event in New York, and somebody relayed the story about someone they knew who reached out to the one law firm they wanted to work at. And they said, no, not at this time. And the person said, can I, touch base again? They did two more times. And the third time they said, we're hiring now. We'd love to talk to you. And the person got the job. So,
Nice.
sometimes, thoughtful, polite persistence really pays off. Don't get dissuaded.
Definitely. And also you talk about in your book about network networking did not come easy for you and that you weren't from a privileged background. Can you explain? Do you think networking is more common for the privileged?
I think that those who may be coming from a privileged background might have parents who understand the value of networking, and perhaps they make a bigger deal out of saying it's important to go out and meet people, or can tell stories about how they've become successful as a result of those relationships. And sometimes those individuals have contacts that can be tremendously helpful. My parents were immigrants. I did not come from that background at all. My parents did understand the value of relationships as a culture, and many European and Asian and African cultures value relationships and building relationships. But my parents didn't know influential people when I was growing up. That should not hold you back, because even within your own circles, there are people who can help educate you and guide you. And the more people you meet, you have to start, right? I think that's very hard, right? To
Yeah.
get that process started. Get the process started as best as you can with whatever networks you have, whether it's your neighborhood, whether it's your church group, whether it's your ethnic group. My parents were Hungarian, so a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people they knew were Hungarian.
Hungarian,
That's
right.
okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's okay. Reach out to people with similar backgrounds. There's nothing wrong with doing that. It gives you a comfort.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, you spread out. From there, you start meeting other people. Even if you don't know somebody who knows somebody, it might take several steps. With those who have better networks, you can go from A to Z right away. You don't have to go through all the alphabet. Sometimes you have to meet many people to get to whoever it is that could be truly helpful to you. But it's all practice. So I learned it over a longer period of time. I got better at it because I practiced it. And then I fully appreciated it. And now, and I would say, and I said this in my book, I am by nature an introvert. I am very comfortable, being in smaller groups, or even, in writing a book is a solitary exercise, right? You don't have a lot of people around you. But I have learned to overcome that natural, shyness, because I also am deeply curious. And what I find is that every time I meet someone new, I'm learning. I truly believe that every single person has some treasure. And it's almost like a treasure hunt when you're talking to people, to unearth that, to find some commonality, something that you share. And there will be something that you share that kind of makes you both light up and have a wonderful conversation, and hopefully want to continue that conversation. And perhaps you can be helpful, or they can be helpful to you. And to any young person who says, I can't possibly be helpful to someone, I will say, you haven't thought long or hard enough about that. And I'll give one story, and I have many.
Mm-hmm.
But at the beginning of my Meet 100 People journey,
Yeah.
post the book, I presented at an event, and a young woman just out of college came up to me and said, would you have coffee with me? And I said, of course I would. We went to coffee, and she wanted job and career advice. And so we spent time doing that. And then we realized that we had this mutual love of Asian food. And she very kindly invited me to Flushing, pardon, to
Don't
Flushing, Queens.
don't worry. I can lighten it too as well if your light doesn't work
Okay, great.
during
Thank you.
editing. So
Okay.
if it works,
Um,
great. Yeah, there you go. I will edit that.
Great. And I will back up on that. So this
Yeah.
young woman reached out to me for
Mhm.
career advice. We had a lovely coffee. We really bonded on our mutual love of Asian food. She invited me to Flushing, Queens at a later date. We went and continued our conversation. Several months later, she reached out to me and said, Pat, I saw there was a call for speakers for TEDx, and I'd like to nominate you. Would you be okay if I did that? And I had
Wow.
never mentioned TED, TED Talks to her at all,
Hmm.
but it has always been on my bucket list, my secret bucket list that I'd never set out into the universe.
Hmm.
And I said, yes, please do. They accepted me for it. I ended up doing a TEDx talk, and I encourage people to take a quick peek at that. It was an incredible experience, and I attribute it all to this young woman. She gave me a gift that is a bigger gift than I could have ever given her. And it was something that was completely unexpected from my end. But she thought of, she thought of me when she saw an opportunity. And I think there's a whole lot to be said for anyone thinking of others when they see something that could be of interest to them, and then making the connection. It's like giving a gift to introduce somebody to somebody else. It's giving a gift for sure to have nominated me for the TED Talk. Those things are wonderful parts of life that you sometimes cannot predict, but the more people you meet, the more opportunities will come to you as part of it, and the more opportunities and ways to say thank you you can provide to others.
That is wonderful and wonderfully explained as well. My next question is, why do colleges not have a networking course? I know it seems silly, but
You know what? I think a lot of people think that networking is a natural thing.
mm,
A lot of people don't understand, and I say it in my book, that, a lot of people think that networking should be as easy as breathing, like no big deal. It should be an easy thing to do. And in my book, I say, even with breathing, something we all do very naturally, there are techniques. You breathe differently when you want to relax yourself. You breathe differently when you meditate. You breathe differently when you are exercising. And very similarly, there are techniques for networking. It can be taught. There are ways to think about, how do you approach someone? How do you do research? How do you ask good questions and really listen to what the other person says and then follow up on that in a thoughtful way? How do you write a thank you note and a follow up note? How do you stay top of mind with somebody? So, those are techniques, those are tactical ways to network well.
why do colleges not have a networking course? I know it seems silly, but
You know what? I think a lot of people think that networking is a natural thing.
mm,
A lot of people don't understand, and I say it in my book, that, a lot of people think that networking should be as easy as breathing, like no big deal. It should be an easy thing to do. And in my book, I say, even with breathing, something we all do very naturally, there are techniques. You breathe differently when you want to relax yourself. You breathe differently when you meditate. You breathe differently when you are exercising. And very similarly, there are techniques for networking. It can be taught. There are ways to think about, how do you approach someone? How do you do research? How do you ask good questions and really listen to what the other person says and then follow up on that in a thoughtful way? How do you write a thank you note and a follow up note? How do you stay top of mind with somebody? So, those are techniques, those are tactical ways to network well. And I wish colleges had a course or at least a session, a seminar on how to do that effectively, because it's not natural. And
mm,
in a virtual world, I would say it's a little bit harder. There are different rules when you're texting or emailing than when you're sitting down and meeting with somebody in person. And those can all be learned.
absolutely. And it's such a case in point that with my mentees, I have mentees that I mentor. Your book is actually included in their tote bag that they get once a year with items that are essential for when I'm not meeting with them, right? Because as you well know, when you mentor, you're not with them every single day or anything like
Right.
that. So while they're not meeting with me, they can still continue to learn. And absolutely, networking definitely does change your life, and it's definitely essential. Um, Going to the last question here is, do you think that confidence is also part of networking?
Absolutely. I think that those people who are confident can approach meetings a different way than if somebody's not confident. And one of the most important parts of my book, the very beginning of it, is you have to spend a little time with yourself, like real time with yourself, undistracted, and kind of do a self assessment. What am I good at? What do I need to improve? What are my goals and objectives? What do I value? What do I want? And I think answering those questions and feeling comfortable with your own answers is the foundation for self confidence. And then I think it's all about practice and reps. So, honestly, the first meeting that you have is not going to go as well as the 20th meeting. naturally. I mean, anything that you do many times,
Hmm.
you get better at. You improve the way in which you interact, how you listen, how you tell your own story, because that is something important too. How do you reveal things about yourself in a concise way that's appealing? And how do you tell stories about yourself that are relevant? And again, short but appealing, where they really do engage the other person. Those are techniques that are learned with practice and with time. And I think confidence helps with that. And confidence is built through repetition and through practice.
Absolutely. Um, Pat, so you've made it. You're at the end of the podcast. And of course, I'm going to ask you the question I ask everyone, and everyone usually has a different answer for it. So, what is your message for the audience today?
My message for the audience is to make the commitment. Because if you make the commitment and you say, this is important to me, I want to do it, you're well on your way. So much of it is saying, this is important to me. I know I'm going to get benefit. I'm going to make it a habit. I'm going to start with one person. So start with one person, meet one new person this week and see where that takes you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Pat. I will set up all your links. So when I publish this podcast, everyone has the links to
Right.
your book and your TEDx talk. So ecstatic. It was very nice catching up with you.
Really great catching up with you. You have my website, which is
Yes.
just meet100people.com. If you need anything else, feel free to reach out. When do you think it may be published?
Oh,
What's your timing?
sorry. Give me 2 seconds here. Give me two
No
seconds.
worries.
Oh, so April 2nd.
Wonderful. I love it.
And let me write it down before I forget. So thank you so much, Pat. It's been absolutely wonderful.
Thank you.
We'll stay in touch.
Yes,
If you
that's
ever
definitely.
count me as part of your media, if you ever have any new updates and any new projects that you're working on, please let me know.
I will definitely do that. And thank you so much for this opportunity. And it's wonderful to see you.
Thank you. I'm going to stop recording.